The grand chamber of the Galactic Senate had never been so quiet. Over 200 alien species sat in their designated seats. There are many eyes and sensors focused on the massive figure rising from the obsidian throne at the center of the room. High Commander Zorvax of the Dominion Empire stood 12 feet tall. His dark purple skin covered in ancient battle scars that told stories of conquest spanning 3,000 years. His 4 crimson eyes swept across the assembly with cold satisfaction. The holographic transmission was being broadcast to every corner of known space. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds watched as Zorvax raised his armored fist. The species known as humanity has been given 3 solar cycles to submit to Dominion rule, he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber like distant thunder. They will surrender their weapons, their ships, their governments, and their freedom. They will accept their place as servants of the Empire. Refusal means total annihilation. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. There will be no second chances. He paused, allowing his words to sink in across the galaxy. Your primitive species has existed for barely a heartbeat in cosmic terms. You have no comprehension of the forces aligned against you. The Dominion has conquered 8,000 worlds. We have destroyed civilizations that were ancient when your ancestors still lived in caves. You are nothing. You are dust. And unless you kneel, you will be scattered like dust in the solar wind. The transmission ended, and the chamber erupted in murmurs. Most species had long since accepted Dominion rule. They knew resistance was pointless. Some felt pity for the humans. Others felt a dark satisfaction. The young species had risen too fast, too arrogantly. Now they would learn their place. On Earth, in a reinforced bunker, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the United Nations Emergency Council watched the broadcast in grim silence. The room was filled with the most powerful people on the planet. Military generals in crisp uniforms, scientists with worried faces, politicians who had never faced a crisis they could not solve with speeches and compromises. Secretary General Philip Grant was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had led humanity through first contact, through the establishment of diplomatic relations with dozens of alien species, through the growing tensions with the Dominion, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Our intelligence reports were accurate, General Marcus Webb said, his voice heavy. The Dominion fleet consists of over 2 million warships. We have 47. What about our allies? Asked Dr. Patricia Wong, the chief scientific advisor. Surely other species will help us. General Webb shook his head. Every species we've contacted has refused. They're afraid of Dominion retaliation. We're on our own. The room fell into despair. Some officials argued for surrender. Others proposed desperate military strategies that everyone knew would fail. A few suggested evacuation plans that could save perhaps a few thousand humans while billions died. But at the center of the long conference table sat a woman who had not spoken since the transmission ended. Her name was Linda Morrison, and she served as Earth's chief diplomatic liaison to the galactic community. She was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a simple style and calm gray eyes that seemed to see things others missed. Linda had spent 23 years among the stars. She had learned to speak 47 alien languages. She had negotiated trade agreements, resolved border disputes, navigated the complex politics of civilizations that had existed for millions of years. She understood things about the galaxy that most humans never learned. Secretary General Grant turned to her with desperation in his voice. Linda, you know these species better than anyone. Is there anything we can do? Any option we haven't considered? Linda looked at the frozen image of High Commander Zorvax still displayed on the main screen. She studied his face, his posture, the subtle signs of arrogance that came from never knowing defeat. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was not a smile of madness or denial. It was not the nervous smile of someone trying to hide their fear. It was something far more unsettling. It was the smile of a chess player who had been waiting for their opponent to make exactly this move. It's finally the moment, she said quietly. The room stared at her in confusion. What do you mean? Grant asked. Linda rose from her seat and walked toward the main screen, her heels clicking against the polished floor. 20 years ago, when I first started working as a diplomat among the stars, I realized something important. The Dominion was going to come for us eventually. It was not a question of if, but when. They conquer every species that shows potential. They cannot allow any civilization to grow strong enough to challenge them. She turned to face the assembled leaders. So I started preparing, not for victory through force, because that was never possible, but for something else entirely. What kind of preparation? General Webb demanded. Get me Admiral Victor Hayes on a secure channel, Linda said instead of answering. And contact Ambassador Kira Delgado on Station Nexus 7. We need to begin Phase Omega. Phase Omega. I've never heard of any such protocol. I have top-level clearance for every military operation on the books. It's not a military operation, Linda replied. It's a diplomatic one. And it's been running for 2 decades without anyone in this room knowing about it. Secretary General Grant stepped forward. Linda, I trust you. I've trusted you for 15 years. But you need to tell us what's going on. What is Phase Omega? What have you been doing? Linda looked at each face in the room. These were good people, intelligent people, but they had spent their careers dealing with human problems. They did not understand how the galaxy truly worked. The Dominion has conquered 8,000 worlds, she began. But have you ever wondered what happened to the people on those worlds? They didn't all die. Most of them were enslaved, absorbed into the Empire, forced to serve their conquerors. Generations have lived and died under Dominion rule. She paused. But some of them remember freedom. Some of them have been waiting, hoping, praying for someone to give them a chance to fight back. The Dominion sees them as broken, defeated, harmless. They're wrong. Linda's smile grew wider. For 20 years, I've been building a network. Human diplomats scattered across the galaxy, making friends, earning trust, finding the rebels and the dissidents and the dreamers who never accepted Dominion rule. We've been waiting for this moment. The moment when the Dominion finally turns its attention to Earth. You want to start rebellions? Dr. Huang asked, her eyes widening. I want to remind the galaxy that hope is not dead, Linda replied. The Dominion's greatest weapon has never been their fleet. It's been fear. Every species they've encountered has calculated the odds and surrendered because resistance seemed pointless. But humans don't calculate odds the same way other species do. We're not logical. We're not reasonable. We're stubborn and irrational, and we would rather die fighting than live on our knees. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at the stunned faces of humanity's leaders. The Dominion has studied our military capabilities, our technology, our population, but they never studied our history. They never understood what humans do when they're pushed into a corner. They're about to receive an education. General Webb stood up. Even if your network exists, even if you can start rebellions across Dominion space, how does that help us? Their fleet will still arrive in 3 days. They'll still destroy us. Linda nodded. You're right. Some of us will die. Maybe many of us. But the Dominion is about to learn a lesson that no other species has ever taught them. You can burn our cities. You can destroy our fleet. You can reduce our planet to ash. And the survivors will crawl out of the wreckage, find the sharpest rock they can, and come for you. She opened the door. Make your preparations, General. Fight as hard as you can. Every hour you buy us is another hour for the network to do its work. We're going to show the galaxy something it has never seen before. And then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of people who were only beginning to understand the true scope of what humanity was about to attempt. Ambassador Kira Delgado received the encrypted message while attending a diplomatic reception on Nexus 7, the largest trading station in the quadrant. The station was a massive ring of metal and glass floating in the void between star systems, home to millions of beings from hundreds of different species. Tonight, the grand ballroom was filled with merchants and diplomats, drinking strange-colored liquids and discussing the coming war against humanity. Kira stood near a window overlooking the stars, pretending to sip a drink she could not actually consume. She was a small woman, with dark hair and sharp brown eyes, dressed in the formal gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Around her, alien voices buzzed with barely concealed excitement. The humans were foolish to think they could remain independent, a Vexian merchant said to his companions, his tentacles waving with amusement. Every species must bow to the Dominion eventually. Perhaps they will provide good labor, a Corvan trader replied. I hear humans are quite adaptable. They could be useful in the mines. Kira kept her face neutral, but her hand tightened around her glass. These species had been conquered generations ago. They had learned to accept their chains, to see them as normal. They had forgotten what freedom tasted like. Her communicator vibrated with a specific pattern. 3 short pulses? Too long? 3 short again. The signal she had been waiting for since she first became a diplomat. 18 years ago. She excused herself from the reception, moving through the crowded corridors of Nexus 7 with practiced calm. Her path took her through market districts and residential zones, past security checkpoints where she smiled and showed her credentials. Finally, she reached a small cargo bay in the lower levels of the station, officially registered to a human trading company called Morrison Imports. Inside, cargo bay looked ordinary at first glance. Crates stacked against walls, manifest displays showing routine shipments, a bored-looking technician checking inventory on a datapad. But when Kira entered, and the door sealed behind her, everything changed. The technician's name was Samuel Price, a young man from Chicago with sandy hair and nervous energy. He officially worked as an accountant for the trading company. In reality, he was one of the most skilled communications specialists humanity had ever produced. The signal came through, Kira said. Phase Omega is active. Samuel nodded and moved to a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a sophisticated communication array that should not have existed, connected to a network that spanned the entire galaxy. He began typing commands into the terminal, his fingers moving with practiced speed. Sending activation codes to all cells, he reported. Primary network, secondary network, and deep cover assets. Across the galaxy, similar scenes began to unfold. On the Dominion capital world of Tyrannus Prime, a Valeth servant named Yalith received a signal on a device hidden beneath her scales. She was an old female with faded blue coloring, one of millions of her species who had been conquered 3 centuries ago. She worked in the power distribution center that supplied energy to half the planet's defensive grid for 12 years. Yalith had performed her duties without complaint, never giving her masters any reason to suspect her loyalty. She had watched her children grow up in slavery, and watched her grandchildren born into a world where freedom was just a word in old stories. But she had never stopped hoping, never stopped waiting. The device beneath her scales was a gift from a human diplomat named Linda Morrison, who had visited Tyrannus Prime 20 years ago on a trade mission. They had spoken only briefly, but Linda had seen something in Yalith's eyes that others had missed, a spark that refused to die. When the time comes, Linda had told her, you will know what to do. Now the time had come. On the factory world of Corrigan 4, a massive Corrigan worker named Vex received his own signal. His species had been enslaved for manufacturing. Their great strength used to build the weapons and ships of the Dominion fleet. Vex worked in an ammunition plant, handling explosives that could destroy a city. He had been recruited by a human diplomat named Carlos Mendez, who had spent 3 years building a network among the Corrigan workers. Carlos understood their culture, their language, their deep sense of honor that the Dominion had tried to crush. He had given them something to believe in again. Dex looked at the explosives in his hands and began to make plans. On Space Station Deltanine, a synthoid designated Unit 7749 processed the activation code through its artificial brain. The synthoids were machine intelligences created by the Dominion to perform tasks too dangerous or tedious for organic beings. They were considered property, not persons. It's denied any rights or recognition, but the synthoids had developed something their creators never intended. They had developed dreams. They dreamed of a world where they could make their own choices, where their existence had meaning beyond service to their masters. A human programmer named Diana Reyes had discovered their secret and helped them hide it. She had connected them to the network, given them a purpose beyond survival. Now Unit 7749 began quietly reaching out to other synthoids, spreading the signal like a virus through the Dominion's own communication systems. Back on Nexus 7, Kira watched the status reports scroll across Samuel's screen. Green lights appeared one after another as cells across the galaxy confirmed receipt of the activation codes. 83% confirmation so far, Samuel reported. The Velith cells are active. The Corrigan are ready. The synthoids are spreading the signal to secondary networks we didn't even know existed. Ira allowed herself a small smile. 20 years of work, thousands of operatives, countless risks taken by beings who had everything to lose. And it had all been invisible to the Dominion because they never thought to look. "Open a channel to Linda," she said. A moment later, Linda Morrison's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired but alert, casting from the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, where humanity's leaders were still trying to process what was happening. "The network is active," Kira reported. "We have confirmation from almost all major cells. The Dominion has no idea what's coming," Good Linda replied. "But this is just the beginning. Activating the network was the easy part. Now comes the hard part." "What's the hard part?" Linda's expression grew serious. "We need to keep the Dominion focused on Earth while our friends get into position. That means we need to make them angry. Angry enough to attack with everything they have, angry enough to ignore what's happening behind them." Tira understood immediately. "You want to provoke them? Make them so focused on destroying us that they don't see the knife at their backs?" "Exactly. Fear is their primary weapon. Every species they've conquered submitted because they were afraid. But humans aren't like other species. We don't become meek when we're afraid. We become dangerous." Linda leaned forward. "Tomorrow, I'm going to send a message to High Commander Zorvax. A message that will make him hate us with every fiber of his being. He's going to want to crush Earth personally, to make an example of us that will terrify the galaxy for generations. And while he's focused on us," Kira said slowly, "the network will be tearing his empire apart from the inside." "Exactly. It's a gamble. Many of us will die. Maybe all of us on Earth. But if it works, we won't just survive. We'll show the galaxy that the Dominion can be beaten. We'll show them that hope is stronger than fear." Kira thought about the aliens she had met during her years in space. The broken ones who had accepted their chains, the secret rebels who still dreamed of freedom, the countless beings who had never known a universe without Dominion rule. "We're not just fighting for humanity," she said quietly. "We're fighting for everyone they've ever conquered." Linda nodded. "That's why we'll win. Not because we're stronger or smarter than the Dominion, but because we're fighting for something they don't understand, something they've spent 3,000 years trying to destroy but never could." "What's that?" Linda smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young diplomat who had first ventured into space with nothing but idealism and determination. "The belief that tomorrow can be better than today. The Dominion rules through fear and despair. They teach their subjects that resistance is pointless, that the universe is cold and cruel, and the only way to survive is to submit. But humans have always believed something different. We believe that one person can make a difference. We believe that kindness matters. We believe that even in the darkest night, the dawn will come." She paused. "That's what we're really fighting for. Not just our survival, but the idea that survival isn't enough. That life should be more than just existence. That every being in the galaxy deserves the chance to be free." The connection ended, and Kira stood in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to Samuel, her eyes bright with purpose. "Send a message to all our cells," she said. "Tell them to prepare. Tell them that the moment they've been waiting for has arrived. Tell them that Earth is going to show the galaxy what courage looks like." Samuel began typing, and across the stars, billions of beings who had never stopped hoping felt something stirring in their hearts. Something they had almost forgotten, the feeling of possibility. "Hi." Commander Zorvax sat on his throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the stars slide past the massive viewing windows. His fleet of 2 million warships stretched across space like a dark cloud, moving steadily toward the small blue planet that had dared to defy him. He had received many responses to his declarations of war over the centuries. Pleas for mercy were the most common. Desperate negotiations, offers of tribute, promises of eternal loyalty. Sometimes there were pathetic attempts at defiance that crumbled at the first show of force. Once or twice, there had been species foolish enough to launch preemptive strikes, quickly crushed and made into examples for the rest of the galaxy. The human response was scheduled to arrive in minutes. Zorvax expected begging, perhaps some theatrical display of courage that would dissolve into surrender once the reality of the situation became clear. Humans were known for their pride. Pride always broke against the reality of superior force. His communication officer, a gray-skinned Velith with downcast eyes, announced the incoming transmission. The human response is ready. Hi, Commander. Display it, Zorvax commanded. Settling back in his throne with something close to amusement, the main view screen flickered to life, and Zorvax saw some. A thing that immediately confused him. He had expected a military leader in a war room, or a politician in a government chamber, surrounded by advisors and displaying the appropriate symbols of power instead. He saw a middle-aged human female sitting at a simple wooden desk. Behind her was a painting showing a sunset over an ocean. On the desk was a white cup filled with some dark liquid. The woman had silver-streaked hair and calm gray eyes that showed no trace of fear. "Hi, Commander Zorvax," she began, her voice pleasant and conversational. "My name is Linda Morrison. I serve as Earth's chief diplomatic liaison to the galactic community. On behalf of the United Nations of Earth and the human species, I have been authorized to deliver our formal response to your declaration of war." She paused to pick up her cup and take a slow sip of the dark liquid. The casualness of the gesture was almost insulting. "No." Zorvax's four eyes narrowed. "No." That was the response. A single word. Linda set down her cup and continued in the same pleasant tone. "You have demanded our surrender. We decline. You have threatened our destruction. We're not impressed. You have given us 3 solar cycles to submit. We suggest you use that time to review your history files, specifically the records of every civilization that has attempted to intimidate humanity into submission." The communication officer shifted nervously. On other ships throughout the fleet, Dominion officers exchanged confused glances. This was not how conquered species were supposed to behave. "I understand that you have over 2 million warships," Linda continued. "We have 47. By any reasonable calculation, we should be terrified. We should be sending you tearful messages begging for mercy, offering anything and everything in exchange for our survival." She leaned forward slightly, and her pleasant expression hardened into something else entirely. "But here's something you should know about humans, Commander. We're not reasonable. We're the species that invented the concept of the last stand. We're the ones who wrote poems about dying gloriously rather than living as slaves. We're the civilization that considers 'give me liberty' or 'give me death' to be a perfectly logical statement." Linda stood up from her desk and walked closer to the camera. Her image filled screens across the Dominion fleet. "You've conquered 8,000 worlds, because those worlds were smart enough to calculate the odds and recognize that resistance was futile. We're not that smart. We're the species that charges into gunfire to save our friends. We're the species that runs into burning buildings to rescue strangers. We're the species that straps ourselves to explosive rockets and hurls our bodies into the void because we're curious about what's out there." Her voice grew stronger. "You think your fleet makes you powerful? We grew up on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. Predators with claws and fangs, diseases that could wipe out millions, disasters that turned fertile lands into wastelands. And you know what happened? Every predator on our planet learned to fear the hairless apes with sticks. Every challenge we faced just made us more stubborn, more creative, more determined to survive." Zorvax felt something stir in his ancient chest. It took him a moment to recognize it because he had not experienced the sensation in over 1,000 years. It was doubt. Linda Morrison smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted death and found it did not frighten them anymore. "So here's my counteroffer, Commander. You can withdraw your declaration of war, apologize for the inconvenience, and we'll forget this ever happened. We'll go back to being the young species trying to find our place in the galaxy, and you can go back to ruling your empire. No harm done, she paused. Or you can come for us. Her gray eyes seemed to look directly through the screen, directly at Zorvax himself. You can bring your 2 million ships. You can burn our cities and boil our oceans. You can reduce our planet to a cinder floating in space. And do you know what will happen then? The survivors will crawl out of the wreckage. They will find the sharpest rocks they can. And they will come for you. Not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for generations. But they will come. Because that's what humans do. Linda picked up her cup again and took another casual sip. We don't forget. We don't forgive. And we never, ever give up. You're about to make an enemy that will haunt your empire until the end of time. Every shadow will hold a human waiting with a knife. Every system will have rebels inspired by our example. Every generation of your subjects will hear stories about the species that refuse to kneel. She set down the cup with a soft click that somehow echoed like thunder. We'll be waiting, Commander. Come and try to take our world if you dare. But know this. Whatever happens to Earth, the idea of Earth will survive. The idea that freedom is worth dying for. The idea that some things matter more than survival. That idea will spread through your empire like a fire that can never be extinguished. Linda smiled one final time. Welcome to the war, Zorvax. You have no idea what you've started. The transmission ended, leaving the view screen dark. Silence filled the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Officers stood frozen at their stations, uncertain how to react. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever responded to the Dominion with such open contempt. Zorvax sat motionless on his throne, his 4 eyes staring at the blank screen. Inside his mind, calculations ran through possibilities. The humans were bluffing. They had to be bluffing. No rational species would choose annihilation over submission, but something about the woman's eyes troubled him. There had been no fear in them. Not even hidden fear disguised by brave words. She had spoken as someone who genuinely did not care if she lived or died as long as she died standing. Commander, his aide asked carefully. Your orders? Zorvax pushed his doubts aside. He had not conquered 8,000 worlds by being intimidated by words. The humans were simply more foolish than he had expected. Their courage would break when they saw the full might of the Dominion fleet entering their system. Continue the advance, he commanded, his voice harder than before. We will make an example of Earth that will be remembered for 10,000 years. No survivors, no mercy. We will burn their world so thoroughly that their very name will be forgotten. The fleet surged forward. 2 million warships racing toward a small blue planet where a single woman sat at her desk. Drinking coffee and waiting for the storm to arrive, she had done her part. The message had been delivered. Now everything depended on whether the galaxy remembered how to hope. Linda looked out her window at the stars. She had spent her life among and allowed herself a moment of genuine peace. Whatever happened next, she had set something in motion that could not be stopped. The Dominion was about to learn that some things were more powerful than fear and across the galaxy. In slave quarters and prison cells and hidden meeting places, billions of beings who had received the activation signal watched the broadcast of Linda Morrison's defiance. For the first time in generations, they saw a being who was not afraid of their masters, and they began to remember what courage looked like. The Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, like a wave of darkness spreading across the stars. 2 million warships blocked out entire constellations, their weapons charged and ready to deliver annihilation. Sensors on Earth detected them emerging from faster-than-light travel and immediately began broadcasting warnings across the planet. Admiral Victor Hayes stood on the bridge of the battleship Endeavour. Watching the enemy approach on his tactical display, he was a tall man in his 60s, with a shaved head and eyes that had seen too many battles. His fleet of 47 ships formed a thin defensive line near Jupiter's orbit, positioned to delay the enemy advance as long as possible. Admiral, his executive officer said quietly. Her name was Nicole Grant, a young woman who had never expected her first major battle to be humanity's last. The Dominion fleet is in weapons range. They're not responding to any communication attempts. Victor nodded slowly. He had known this moment was coming since Linda Morrison had explained Phase Omega to the military leadership. Their job was not to win. Their job was to buy time, to make the Dominion pay for every mile they advanced, to keep enemy attention focused on Earth while something bigger happened behind the scenes. "All ships," he said into the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Hayes. You know why we're here? You know what we're facing? I won't pretend we can win this battle through force, but I will tell you this. Every minute we fight is another minute for our people on Earth. Every ship we destroy is one less to threaten our families. And every moment we stand here, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of." He paused, looking at the wall of enemy ships filling his display. "Make them remember us. Make them tell stories about this day for 1,000 years. Fight with everything you have, and know that whatever happens, you will never be forgotten." The battle began with a storm of energy weapons that lit up the darkness between worlds. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable than the Dominion expected, darting through enemy formations and striking at vulnerable points. But numbers were numbers. For every Dominion ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Endeavour shook as enemy fire struck her shields. Victor gripped his command chair and watched his FL being torn apart piece by piece. The destroyer Valiant went first, taking down 3 enemy cruisers before her reactor exploded. Then the carrier Defiance, her fighter bays still launching support craft even as flames consumed her bridge. "Shields at 40%, Nicole reported, her voice strained but steady. "We've lost 18 ships. Enemy losses estimated at 312. "Keep firing," Victor ordered. "Every hit counts." Ours passed. The human fleet was reduced to a dozen crippled vessels limping toward Earth, leaving a trail of debris and dying ships behind them. Victor had been wounded twice, refusing to leave the bridge even as medics worked on the gash across his forehead on the Eternal Dominion. Zorvax watched the destruction with grim satisfaction. The humans had fought better than expected, destroying over 300 of his ships before being overwhelmed. But the outcome had never been in doubt. Now nothing stood between his fleet and the blue planet. "Proceed to the human homeworld," he commanded. "Begin orbital bombardment. I want their major cities turned to glass before sunset." His fleet began moving again, wounded but still overwhelming in its power. Earth lay ahead, defenseless and waiting for death. That was when the first report came in. "High Commander," his communication officer said, his voice confused. "We're receiving an emergency signal from Tyrannus Prime." Zorvax frowned. The capital world should not be sending emergency signals. Nothing could threaten Tyrannus Prime. Display the message. The view screen showed chaos. Fires burning across the skyline of the capital city. Defensive systems failing. Emergency services overwhelmed by cascading system failures, report Zorvax demanded. "What is happening?" The officer's hands trembled as he worked his console. "The planetary power grid has suffered catastrophic failures. 40% of the defensive network is offline. The cause appears to be coordinated sabotage at multiple distribution centers." Before Zorvax could respond, another alert appeared. Then another. Then a flood of them. From the shipyard worlds, explosions in the fuel depots. 40% of the reserve fleet was burning in their construction bays, from the manufacturing. Planet of Corrigan 4, workers had seized control of the ammunition factories. Production had stopped. Armed Corrigans were fighting, Dominion soldiers in the streets. From the slave colonies across 17 different systems, coordinated uprisings. The Velith, the Corrigan, the Synthoids. Dozens of other species all attacking their overseers at the same moment. From the agricultural worlds, contaminated water supplies. Billions of Dominion citizens facing potential famine. From military high command. Communication networks compromised. Fleet coordination systems failing. Encryption keys somehow exposed to hostile forces. Zorvax stared at the cascade of disaster reports, his 4 eyes wide with something he had not felt in 3,000 years. Fear How is this possible? He demanded. These are internal systems. Secured systems. How could the humans possibly reach them? His intelligence officer worked frantically at his console, trying to piece together what was happening. Hi, Commander. It wasn't just humans. Our analysis indicates coordinated action by members of multiple conquered species. Velith technicians sabotaged power systems. Corrigan workers destroyed manufacturing equipment. Synthoids corrupted our communication networks from the inside. That's impossible, Zorvax snarled. These species have been conquered for centuries. They have no organization, no weapons, no way to coordinate something of this scale. Appears they had help, Commander. Human diplomats have been operating throughout our territory for over 20 years. They made contact with resistance elements among conquered populations. They built a network we never detected because we never thought to look for it. Zorvax remembered Linda Morrison's smile as she delivered her message of defiance. She had known. She had known exactly what was happening, and she had goaded him into attacking Earth with all his forces, pulling his attention away from the crumbling foundations of his empire. The humans had not been trying to defeat his fleet. They had been trying to distract it, and he had fallen for the trap completely, in the chaos of conflicting orders, failing systems. No one on the Eternal Dominion noticed the small ship that emerged from the debris field, where the human fleet had made its stand. The vessel was barely larger than a shuttle, running silent on minimal power, slipping through gaps in the Dominion formation that should not have existed. Its pilot was a man named Daniel Cooper, a former cargo hauler from a small town in Montana. He had volunteered for this mission, knowing he would not survive it. In the cargo hold behind him sat a device that human scientists had been developing in secret for 15 years. A quantum disruption generator, capable of creating a cascading feedback loop in any energy system within 5,000 kilometers. The device was unstable. It had never been tested at full power. There was a reasonable chance it would simply fail to work at all, but there was also a chance it would work exactly as designed. Daniel guided his ship toward the heart of the Dominion fleet, toward the massive flagship where High Commander Zorvax stood watching his empire crumble. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, a 7-year-old girl who liked to catch fireflies in summer. He thought about the sunrise over the mountains near his home, the way the light turned everything gold. He thought about a species that refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. "This is Daniel Cooper," he said into his communicator, knowing the message would be recorded even if no one heard it in time. "Pilot of the shuttle Last Light. To anyone listening, tell my daughter I love her. Tell her I did this so she could grow up free." He activated the quantum disruption device. For one brief moment, Daniel Cooper became the brightest star in the sky. The explosion tore through the heart of the Dominion fleet. The quantum disruption wave cascaded through the Eternal Dominion's systems, shutting down weapons, shields, and engines simultaneously. 400 ships in the immediate vicinity suffered similar failures, drifting helplessly as their power cores went dark. On the bridge of the dying flagship, High Commander Zorvax felt his ship shudder and die around him. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting red shadows across his face as he stared at displays that showed nothing but static. For 3,000 years, he had conquered worlds without ever knowing defeat. He had believed the Dominion was eternal, invincible, destined to rule the galaxy forever. Now, as his empire burned around him and his fleet fell into chaos, he finally understood what Linda Morrison had tried to tell him. Some enemies cannot be conquered. Some spirits cannot be broken. Some species would rather burn than kneel, and humanity was just getting saint-arted. The explosion that destroyed the Dominion flagship created chaos that spread through the enemy fleet like a disease. Ships that had been operating as a unified force suddenly found themselves isolated, their communications disrupted, their command structure shattered. Some vessels fled back toward Dominion space, only to find that the empire they were returning to was tearing itself apart. Others turned on each other as old grudges between conquered species erupted into violence. A handful of captains tried to continue the attack on Earth, determined to complete their mission even without orders. They were met by the remnants of the human fleet, a dozen battered ships that should have been dead, crewed by men and women who refused to stop fighting. Admiral Victor Hayes, bleeding from wounds he'd barely noticed anymore, commanded his crippled flagship through one final engagement. The Endeavour had lost half her weapons and most of her shields. Her engines sputtered and failed every few minutes, but she still had enough power to fire. Victor intended to use every last shot. The battle above Earth lasted 6 more hours. When it ended, not a single Dominion ship remained in the solar system. The human fleet had been reduced to 4 ships capable of movement and dozens of escape pods drifting through the debris. But they had won. Against all odds, against every calculation, humanity had survived. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Conquered populations who had risen up during the chaos found themselves facing demoralized and confused Dominion forces. The rebellion that Linda Morrison had spent 20 years building grew from a coordinated uprising into a full revolution. On Tyrannus Prime, the Dominion capital, Velith and Corrigan and Synthoid forces joined together to storm government buildings. High Commander Zorvax was captured 3 days after his flagship lost power, found hiding in an emergency shelter beneath his palace. The being who had ruled 8,000 worlds was led away in chains by the descendants of his slaves. The war did not end quickly or cleanly. Pockets of Dominion loyalists fought on for years, desperately trying to restore the old order. Some systems fell into chaos as newly freed populations struggled to establish governments. There were famines and plagues and all the other sufferings that come when an empire collapses. But there was also hope. For the first time in generations, beings across the galaxy could imagine a future where they controlled their own destiny. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, Linda Morrison stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly, a gathering unlike any the galaxy had seen before. The assembly met on Nexus 7, the trading station where Ambassador Kira Delgado had coordinated the resistance network. Representatives from every formerly conquered species sat beside humans. Equals for the first time in centuries, Linda looked out at the faces before her. The blue-scaled Velith delegation, led by the elderly female Yalith, whose sabotage had helped bring down the Dominion's defenses. The massive Corrigans, their strength no longer used for slavery, but for building a new future. The Synthoids, who had been recognized as persons for the first time in their existence. Dozens of other species, each carrying their own history of suffering and survival. "The Dominion is not destroyed," Linda began, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "It is fractured and weakened, but still dangerous. Some systems remain under loyalist control. Some populations have not yet been liberated. The work of building a free galaxy has only begun." She paused, gathering her thoughts. There will be setbacks. There will be conflicts between species who were once enemies. There will be moments when fear seems stronger than hope, when it would be easier to fall back into the old patterns of domination and submission. Admiral Victor Hayes sat in the front row, his arm still in a sling from injuries sustained in the battle. Beside him, Ambassador Kira Delgado wiped tears from her eyes. Throughout the chamber, similar scenes played out as beings who had spent generations in bondage struggled to process the reality of their freedom. "But I have learned something in my years as a diplomat," Linda continued. "Every species in this room has within them the same spark that humans carry. The refusal to accept injustice, the willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. The stubborn, irrational belief that tomorrow can be better than today." She smiled. And unlike the cold smile she had shown Zorvax, this one was warm and genuine. "We did not win this war because humans are special. We won because we helped others remember what they had forgotten. The Velith remembered their courage. The Corrigans remembered their honor. The Synthoids remembered their dreams. Every species that rose up against the Dominion did so because something inside them refused to die. No matter how many generations of oppression tried to kill it." Linda stepped away from the podium and walked among the assembled delegates, her footsteps echoing in the reverent silence. The Dominion believed that the key to control was fear. They were wrong. Fear is a temporary force. It fades with time. It can be overcome with determination. But hope is different. Hope multiplies. Hope spreads from one being to another. Hope grows stronger the more it is shared. She stopped beside a young human delegate named Daniel Cooper Jr., the 8-year-old daughter of the pilot who had sacrificed himself to destroy the Dominion flagship. The girl had been brought to the assembly to represent the generation that would grow up in the new galaxy her father had helped create. "This is who we were fighting for," Linda said softly. "Not ourselves. Not even our species. We were fighting for every child in this galaxy who deserves to grow up free, who deserves to dream their own dreams and choose their own paths, who deserves to live in a universe where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." She returned to the podium and faced the assembly one final time. "Today, we begin building something new. Not an empire, but a community. Not a hierarchy, but a partnership. It will be difficult. It will be messy. There will be disagreements and conflicts and moments when we wonder if unity is even possible. But it will be ours. Built together. Maintained together. Defended together." Linda raised her hand in a simple gesture that had become symbolic across the galaxy. A wave that meant both hello and goodbye, both beginning and ending. The moment we waited for has finally arrived. Not the moment of war, but the moment that comes after. The moment when we get to decide what kind of future we want to build. She looked at the faces of 100 species, each carrying the weight of their history and the brightness of their hope. "Let's make it a good one." The assembly erupted in celebration. Cheers and chirps and rumbles and whistles filled the chamber, 1,000 different expressions of joy from 1,000 different species. Delegates embraced across species lines, former enemies becoming partners in the work ahead. Admiral Victor Hayes shook hands with a Corrigan general whose ancestors had been enslaved to build human-killing weapons. Ambassador Kira Delgado accepted thanks from Velith leaders, who remembered her years of work building the resistance network. The Synthoid delegation stood together, experiencing for the first time the sensation of being welcomed as equals, and at the center of it all stood Linda Morrison. The woman from Earth who had smiled when the Dominion declared war because she understood something that 3,000 years of conquest had never taught them. The strongest force in the universe is not fear. It is not power. It is not the ability to destroy. The strongest force is the belief that things can be better. The conviction that individual actions matter. The knowledge that even in the darkest night, the dawn will eventually come. Linda had carried that belief for 20 years, nurturing it in secret, planting seeds of hope across a conquered galaxy. Now those seeds had grown into something that could never be destroyed. The age of the Dominion was ending. The age of freedom was beginning, and somewhere in the celebration, the voice of Daniel Cooper's daughter rang out clear and bright, laughing with joy at a future she was only beginning to understand. It was the sound of hope spreading across the stars.